When Helen's husband passed away, no one truly believed she would manage to live alone for long. She was already 76, her hair as white as the evening clouds, living in a small wooden house at the end of a quiet street. Neighbors, relatives, even her children, all thought she would soon move in with her family, or at least need a live-in helper. But Helen declined, politely yet firmly. "I'm still alive, and I want to live on my own." Her kitchen, once the domain of her late husband, now became the place where she relearned every small gesture. Some mornings she would stand for a long while in front of the stove, just trying to remember how to light it. Some afternoons she fumbled trying to distinguish between a teaspoon and a tablespoon. Her husband used to be an excellent cook, and for 50 years she had rarely had to set foot in the kitchen herself. But now, things were different. No one was beside her, and she had no reason to give up. The first dish she made was baked apples, not because she liked them, but because that was the dish he used to make for her whenever the weather turned cold. She remembered the gentle scent of cinnamon, the slightly burnt edges of the apple skin, and the clinking sound of the peeler in his hands. She stood in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she held the knife, slicing the apples slowly. As she worked, she whispered softly as if talking to him, "You see, this is my first time peeling apples without turning them into mush." That night, she ate dinner alone, but she wasn't lonely. On the table were her baked apples, a cup of hot tea, and a notebook in which she was documenting her journey of learning to live independently in her twilight years. On the first page, she wrote, "Day 1, cooked by myself, not great, but I didn't die." Strangely, from that day of apple peeling, Helen began to feel something awaken within her. Perhaps it was a quiet joy, like sunlight filtering through leaves after the rain. She began reorganizing her closet, pulling out old silk dresses to wash and iron. She learned how to make coffee with a small machine, how to replace the kettle's cord, and sometimes even dared to climb a ladder to remove cobwebs from the corners, tasks that used to be instantly handled by others. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She just wanted each day to have one small thing that made her feel alive. One day, her son, Peter, dropped by unexpectedly. He found her kneeling in the yard, hands in the soil, replanting old lavender bushes. He panicked. "Mom, what are you doing? Why didn't you call me for help?" She smiled, squinting beneath her straw hat. "I'm learning how to live without troubling anyone." He didn't say anything more. He just quietly watched her, then bent down to join. His hands, usually familiar only with keyboards, clumsily moved alongside his mother's wrinkled but steady ones. Since then, Helen has continued to live alone, not because no one was willing to help, but because she chose to. She wanted to walk to the morning market on her own, to chat with the familiar vegetable seller, to pay by herself and carry her bag back home. Whenever she had back pain, she would open her notebook and reread what she had once written. "Back hurts today, which means I can still feel. That means I'm alive." Her 10-year-old granddaughter, Lily, once asked, "Grandma, don't you feel sad being alone?" She sat down, stroked the girl's head, and replied, "Because I'm not lonely. I have myself, and I think I'm worth being with." Independence in old age doesn't mean being able to do everything. It's about not being afraid to start over. Not afraid of being slow, of making mistakes, or of breaking something. Every day of living to Helen was a chance to practice patience and gratitude. She knew she was no longer young, but she also knew, no one is ever too old to learn something new, never too late to begin again. One late autumn morning, neighbors saw Helen standing on her porch, holding a tray of freshly baked cookies. She gave one to each person. When asked if there was any special occasion, she simply said, "I've lived alone for 3 years now. Today I want to celebrate that I've never lived alone for this long and still felt happy." If you're in your 70s, learning how to live again, or afraid of having to live alone, remember Helen. Start with something small. Brew a cup of tea, peel an apple, or simply open a window and let the light in. And if you're listening to this story, leave a number 1 so I know you're with me. Tell me, what small thing are you doing each day to take care of yourself? Mr. Joseph used to be the chief accountant of a major timber company in Oregon. His life revolved around numbers, meticulously tracking every expense and every bit of income. Friends called him the man who never missed a cent, and his wife often joked, "If I lost my wallet, he could probably tell you the serial number of every bill inside." But by the time he turned 78 after his wife passed away, he began living alone. Everything remained neat and orderly, as if by professional habit, but there was an emptiness that no spreadsheet could fill. One Wednesday afternoon, he received an invitation from a local senior wellness center. They sent a car right to his doorstep, taking him and a few other elderly neighbors to a free health experience event. There were gifts, light refreshments, and staff in white coats taking blood pressure and handing out flyers. At first, Mr. Joseph was wary. He read every line of the informational pamphlet carefully. But when a staff member introduced a dietary supplement that rejuvenates the whole body, restores memory, improves hearing, vision, and even knees in just 30 days, he froze for a moment. He thought about the recent nights where he left the lights on, the creaking of his knees in the morning, and the shortness of breath after climbing stairs. And so he decided to give it a try. A 3-month supply, $300 with a senior discount. Paid on the spot. They even gave him a free handheld blood pressure monitor. Just take it every morning. No need to exercise, no need to change your diet. You'll naturally feel young again, said the consultant with a very sincere smile. Back home, Mr. Joseph sat at the table, carefully placing the box on his polished wooden surface. His hands trembled as he opened it, not from illness, but from a creeping sense of doubt. He read every word on the box, scanned the tiny print of ingredients, names he had never heard before. He held the leaflet, searching for any sign of certification, but there was nothing but vague promises. A week later, he called the number printed on the box. No answer. He returned to the address on the flyer. The place was closed down. The sting of being deceived wasn't just about the money. It was that he, someone who had spent his life in control, had allowed emotion to override logic. That night, he opened an old notebook where he used to jot down precise budgeting notes during his working years. He wrote a short line, "Nothing costs more than gullibility." Then he closed the notebook and quietly drank a cup of ginger tea. Since that incident, Mr. Joseph began sharing his story with other elderly neighbors in the area. He held nothing back. He even brought the empty product box to show people. "Don't trade the feeling of being cared for with a sense of loss," he said. Then he started a small weekly group at the local church, a place where seniors could come together and share products they had tried, strange phone calls that they received, or people who claimed to be doctors offering miracle solutions. He called it the Wallet Watch Club. One time, an elderly woman brought a product she was about to buy, priced at $500. After listening to Mr. Joseph's talk, she quietly put it back in her bag and said, "I don't need to feel young again. I just need to live with dignity." Mr. Joseph smiled, and for the first time in many months, he felt a weight lift. Not because he got his money back, but because he realized he was still useful. There's a truth few dare to say out loud. As we age, we become easier to sway. Just a kind word. "You still look healthy." Just a caring glance. "Do you need help with anything?" is enough to make many seniors open up and open their wallets. But the more easily moved we are, the more alert we need to be. Because no one protects an elder's wallet better than the elder themselves. And if you're listening to this story, if you've ever been pitched a miracle product, promised to look 10 years younger with just one pill a day, stop, ask questions, wait a night before you decide. Because no gift is ever truly free, and no pill can replace a healthy lifestyle, genuine care, and self-respect. If you've been through something similar, or if you want to help warn others, leave a number 2 so I know you're here, you're listening, and you're guarding not just your health, but your dignity and wisdom. Frank lived alone in a small house on the outskirts of Michigan, where winters could bury the windows in silence under thick layers of snow. He was 82 years old, his hair completely white, but his eyes still shone, not with physical vitality, but with a mind that never stopped working. His living room looked like a miniature newspaper archive, Stacks of newspapers were neatly organized by month, by year, by subject. In the left corner was the domestic politics section. The right corner housed science and life. At the center of the table lay a worn leather notebook, where Frank pasted small clippings and jotted down ideas he thought were worth pondering. Every morning, Frank had a ritual: brew black coffee, open the window to let in the light, sit upright at the table, open the latest newspaper, and read. No skimming, no scanning, no just browsing. He read every line, scribbled notes in the margins, underlined passages, and tore out the articles he found worth saving. It might be a new medical invention, an editorial on ethics, or simply a human interest story that made him reflect. Many thought it was unnecessary. Who still reads print newspapers, Frank? Some laughed, others shook their heads, but he just smiled and kept going. I don't keep newspapers to fight forgetfulness. I keep them to remember I once thought deeply. One winter afternoon, his granddaughter, Emma, stopped by after school. She was 16, vibrant and modern, always with headphones on and fingers tapping away at her phone. When she entered, she saw him cutting out a small article titled, "How to Train Your Memory After 80. She chuckled. "You really still read that stuff, Grandpa?" He looked up at her, eyes not angry, just sad. "Yes, because I'm afraid that one day I'll forget who you are." Her laughter faded into silence. From that day forward, she visited him once a week, no more glued to her phone. She sat beside him, listening as he recounted interesting articles. Once he handed her a clipping about teenage psychology and said, "I don't understand all of it, but I want to understand you better." Frank had never gone to college, nor was he a scientist. He was a retired mechanic who had worked with his hands all his life. But he deeply understood one thing: when the body begins to fade, the mind becomes the last pillar of dignity. And the mind cannot be sustained by watching TV all day or repeating the same stale routine. Whenever he noticed himself forgetting something, a neighbor's name, where he put his keys, the birthday of his late wife, he would sit down, open his notebook, reread an old article, and write a line at the bottom: "I still remember how to learn." Memory is the quietest, most fragile, and yet most precious asset of the elderly. And like muscles, memory must be exercised, refreshed, and nurtured with curiosity, with thought, and with endless questioning. Frank knew he wouldn't live forever, but he believed that as long as he kept writing down ideas, kept reading an article from start to finish, he was still truly alive. And when he passed, as all of us eventually do, his grandchildren kept the notebooks he left behind. On the last page, there was only one line: "Thinking is how I resisted the slow death of old age." If you're in your 70s or have ever felt yourself becoming more forgetful than before, think of Frank. Don't let your mind retire before you do. Read, write, question, one new thing every day. And if you're still listening to me by now, leave a number 3 so I know you're still nurturing your mind. Tell me, what are you reading lately? Or what was the last thing that truly made you stop and think? Ruth had always been a strict mother. Throughout the years of raising her child, she was the one who made the decisions, the one who laid down the rules, the one who always had the final word. Her daughter, Clara, grew up within that structure, obedient and successful. But there was one thing Ruth either failed to notice or chose to ignore: the growing distance between mother and daughter. She realized it one autumn evening. The wind howled outside the porch. Yellow leaves blanketed the path. Ruth called Clara just to ask if she'd had dinner, but on the other end came a hurried response: "I'm in a meeting, Mom. Can I call you later?" The call lasted less than a minute. Ruth stared at the darkening phone screen, then sat in silence for a long time in the cold kitchen. When was the last time the two of them shared a meal without arguing? She couldn't recall. The last time she said, "I'm proud of you," was when Clara graduated college, nearly 20 years ago. Most of their recent conversations were filled with critiques, worries, or mild reproaches. "You should take better care of your child. You should spend more time with your family. Why did you leave that job? It was stable." Ruth didn't realize that each of her words, though rooted in love, was like another brick in a wall, building a barrier between two generations. That changed the day she attended a senior community gathering. The topic that day was listening to feel closer. In the speaker, a young woman around Clara's age spoke of how she had always felt gently controlled by her mother to the point that she never dared to share her true feelings. Her words startled Ruth. The woman said, "We don't need advice. We need a nod, an understanding glance, a hand that doesn't interrupt." That night, Ruth didn't call Clara. She simply texted, "I miss you. If you're free, I'd love to see you." 2 days later, Clara came by, her eyes still tired from work. But this time, Ruth didn't ask anything. She poured tea, offered cookies, and just sat quietly and listened. No interruptions, no suggestions, no reactions. Clara spoke more than Ruth expected, about work stress, about the struggles of being a single mom, about the exhaustion of trying to be both a daughter and a mother. At the end, Clara asked, "Don't you think I'm doing anything wrong?" Ruth shook her head. "I see you trying harder than I ever knew. I'm sorry I only ever saw what you hadn't done, not what you were carrying." Clara broke down in tears, and for the first time in many years, Ruth hugged her daughter and felt no distance between them. After that day, their conversations became more frequent, but no longer interrogations. They became slow walks, meals where each shared a small story. Ruth no longer interrupted when Clara said, "Mom, I'm tired." She simply held her daughter's hand, saying nothing and needing to say nothing. Once Clara shared she was worried about her own daughter, a 10-year-old who had begun to lie. Ruth smiled and recalled the time Clara skipped school just to buy ice cream. They both burst into laughter. In that moment, Clara looked at her mother differently, no longer with guarded eyes, but with the warm gaze of a companion. Ruth had come to understand something. Every mother wants to help with words, but sometimes what a child needs is the kind of silence that doesn't judge. Not to teach, just to listen. The parent-child relationship in old age is no longer like when the child was young. When children have grown, have families, have their own wounds, even the gentlest advice can feel like a scratch. But sincere listening, a recognition of their efforts, that can be the silent healing they need most. If you have a child whom you feel is distant, don't try to tell them what to do. Try asking a different question. Is there something you'd like to share with me? Then be silent and listen. And if you're still with me at this point in the story, if you've ever felt the gap between you and your child widening, leave a number 4 so I know you're trying to rebuild the words left unsaid. Tell me, when was the last time you truly listened to your child? George met his wife for the first time when he was just 23. It was at a backyard summer party, hot and humid, and she was wearing a simple white dress, smiling at everyone but saying very little. George, then a young mechanic fresh out of the military, watched her the entire evening, and somehow he just knew. This was the woman he would spend his life learning how to love. They spent over 50 years together. 2 children, 3 grandchildren, a small suburban home, and countless ordinary days that became the most precious memories in hindsight. George was never a romantic. He couldn't write poetry, never remembered anniversaries, but he worked tirelessly, never once letting his wife worry about tomorrow's meal. Then one day she started forgetting. At first it was little things, forgetting to put the milk in the fridge, cooking something, and forgetting to turn off the stove. But soon the forgetfulness grew. One morning she couldn't remember the way home from a walk. Once she called her grandchild by the name of an old neighbor. Eventually the doctor diagnosed early-stage Alzheimer's. George was stunned. He didn't say much. He quietly placed reminder notes all around the house, helped her get used to setting alarms, and began a new routine. Every evening he would sit on the porch with paper and pencil and draw her portrait. He had never studied art. His early sketches were stiff, the proportions off, but he kept drawing. Each evening as the sunlight slanted across the old roof tiles, he would sit there watching her read a book or simply sit in silence watching the trees. He tried to capture that posture, that face, the expression she might not remember tomorrow, but that he wanted to preserve. When his grandchild asked why he drew her every day, George simply said, Because if one day she no longer remembers who I am, at least I'll still remember who she was. Sometimes she sat beside him, watching him draw. Once she looked at a sketch and asked, "Who's the girl in the picture?" George replied, "Someone I used to love." She smiled playfully. "Then you should love her forever." He nodded. "I'm trying." Some days her confusion was severe. She didn't recognize her grandchildren, couldn't remember if she had eaten. But each evening when George brought out the paper, she would sit quietly, her eyes softening as if something familiar stirred inside her. Sometimes she'd ask, "Have I sat here before?" George wouldn't answer. He would just keep drawing. George's passion didn't come in youth. It came when he realized some things can't be held with words, can't be secured by memory. They can only be preserved through action, steady, repetitive, quiet, like the way he once loved her, came home on time every day for 40 years, got up early to make her coffee even though he never drank it himself. The last portrait he drew just a few months before she passed was of her napping in the armchair, blankets slipping off one side. He sketched quickly, his hand slightly trembling. But in the drawing, even with her eyes closed, her face remained extraordinarily tender. He wrote quietly in the corner of the page, "I was here every day, every evening." When she passed away, George framed 36 portraits and hung them along the hallway. Each one was a version of the woman he had loved, someone he had redrawn daily to remember, to hold on to keep living for. Someone asked him, "Don't you feel sad looking at those drawings?" George replied, "No, they remind me I didn't miss a thing. I gave everything I had to the one I loved, even when she no longer remembered my name." If you're in your 70s and think you're too old to start a passion, think of George. Passion doesn't have to be grand, doesn't have to make money. It just needs to be enough to keep a part of your soul alive when everything else begins to fade. And if you're still listening to this story, if you've ever painted, written, played music, or cared for a garden just to soothe your heart, leave a number 5 so I know your passion still flows through you, that there's still something that makes you live each day with meaning. Every morning in the small neighborhood where Elizabeth lived, the same image was familiar to all: an elderly woman with silver hair, petite in stature but steady on her bicycle, riding with an old man seated behind her, his arms gently wrapped around her waist, his head leaning forward as if afraid the wind might blow away his memories. The bicycle was far from new. The rim bent slightly on one side, the rear seat padded with a thin cushion. But it still ran smoothly, slowly but surely, just like the rhythm of the life they had shared for nearly half a century. Edward, Elizabeth's husband, had once been a strong, broad-shouldered man, a construction worker by trade. To Elizabeth, he was the pillar, the shoulder to lean on, the man who never let her worry about fixing a pipe or climbing a ladder to change a light bulb. But at 72, he suffered a minor stroke. The after effects weren't severe, but they slowed him down, made him weaker, and he could no longer ride a bike on his own. The doctor recommended weekly checkups. Elizabeth nodded, saying very little. The next day, she pulled out the old bicycle, wiped it down, pumped the tires, checked the brakes. No one told her she had to, but she knew if she didn't do it, no one else would. On the first ride to the clinic, it began to drizzle. Edward sat behind, hesitant. Maybe I should call a taxi. She turned back, pulled her coat over his shoulders, and softly replied, "You rode this bike to take me to the hospital when I gave birth to both our children. Now it's my turn." That one sentence left him speechless for the entire ride. From that day on, every morning followed the same routine. She woke early, made breakfast, helped him dress, and together they went to the bike. At first, neighbors were surprised. Then they grew used to it and came to admire it. Younger folks in the neighborhood would watch her and say, "How are you still so strong, Grandma?" She smiled gently. "It's not strength, it's love." On scorching days, she wiped sweat from his brow while pedaling. On tiring days, he leaned his head on her shoulder the whole ride home. One morning, he forgot their son's name entirely. She didn't cry. She just held his hand and said, It's okay as long as you still remember who I am. Elizabeth didn't see what she was doing as extraordinary. To her, it was simply part of love, a promise never spoken aloud. If one day you grow weaker, I'll become stronger for both of us. People often think great love is about grand gestures, extravagant anniversaries, or expensive flowers. But Elizabeth proved the opposite. Love wakes up earlier than usual, accepting a little more back pain, just so your partner can sit behind you and not have to struggle. During one checkup, a young doctor asked Edward, "Do you ever worry about what would happen if your wife couldn't ride you here anymore?" Edward smiled, eyes shining with quiet faith. "I'm not worried, because if she can't ride me anymore, she'll find another way, but she'll never let me go alone." A life partner isn't the one who's strongest or who can do everything. It's the one who's still there, even when everything else changes. If you're living with someone who's journeyed with you through the years, take another look at them. Not to count the wrinkles, but to see that some relationships don't need promises because they've already been kept every day through action. And if you're still listening to me now, if you've ever woken early to do something kind for your partner without anyone knowing, leave a number 6 so I know you're still holding on to a quiet, steadfast love. Tell me, what small but meaningful thing have you done recently for the one you love? Walter turned 80 on a freezing winter morning. Snow blanketed the balcony and the bare tree branches twisted like the exposed veins of old age. He didn't throw a party. No one came. His son, David, called to say happy birthday, followed by the usual line, "I'm really busy, Dad, I'll drop by next week." Next week never came. Walter had been living alone for over 10 years, ever since his wife passed. He was used to quiet mornings, to dinners accompanied only by the clink of spoon against bowl, to his old radio playing the same news station. But there was one thing he still hadn't gotten used to, the silence of connection. Every time he called his son, he heard rushed voices, crying children, and hang-ups that came too fast. Once he heard his granddaughter ask, "Dad, does Grandpa even know how to video call?" followed by a giggle. Walter stayed silent. He didn't know. One night, he opened an old box. Inside was a family photo taken on Christmas of 2005, the last time everyone had been together. He stared at his youngest grandchild's face, now 13, and realized he couldn't remember the sound of her laughter. For the first time in years, he felt afraid. Not of being alone, but of being forgotten, even in the memories of the people he loved. The next morning, Walter took the bus to the community library. He asked the staff, "Do you have any classes here for seniors to learn how to use smartphones?" The young woman was surprised, then smiled and handed him a sign-up form. He gripped a pen, his hand trembling slightly as he filled out each box. Name, Walter Gregory, age 80, goal, make a video call to my grandchild. At the first class, he was given a tablet. The instructor, a young man named Mason, patiently showed him each step. Walter wrote everything down: how to turn it on, how to find the camera icon, how to hit the red button to hang up. He learned like a child learning the alphabet, slowly. But he didn't give up. A week later, he made his first successful video call. The screen lit up. David's face appeared, with his wife and their 2 kids beside him. They all gasped in surprise, laughing when they saw Walter sitting upright, glasses on, eyes glistening. "You really called us, Dad?" David asked. Walter didn't answer right away. He raised a hand and waved, lips trembling. "I've missed your voices so much." His granddaughter Lily ran to the screen. "Grandpa, why didn't you call us sooner?" He smiled and replied gently, "Because until now, I only knew how to wait for your call." From that day on, Walter made a video call every week. No special occasion, sometimes just to ask, "How's the weather over there?" Once he turned his camera toward the garden his wife once loved and said, "This is where your mom used to read. I've kept it the same." Gradually, he learned to send texts, photos. He took pictures of sunsets through his window, wildflowers growing by the ledge, a simple meal he cooked himself. Each image was a quiet message. "I'm still here, still living, still thinking of you." One day the tablet malfunctioned. he couldn't connect. Instead of giving up, he took the bus to the library. Mason smiled, made a few adjustments, and said, "You're the most persistent student I've ever met." Walter nodded, "Because if I give up, I lose the connection again. And I can't bear that one more time." Learning technology at 80 wasn't about keeping up with the world. It was about holding on to the fragile thread that tied him to it, so that even if he lived alone, he wouldn't be forgotten. Walter never said it aloud, but everyone understood. He didn't learn to video call because he liked gadgets. He learned because he didn't want his grandchildren to grow up knowing him only as a dusty frame on the wall, but as a grandpa who once waved at them through a screen and said, "I love you." If you're in your later years and technology feels like a mountain too steep to climb, think of Walter. You don't have to conquer it. Just take one step at a time, like climbing stairs with no rush. Every button you learn to press opens a door to a laugh, a glance, a connection that no longer feels so far away. And if you're still with me now, if you've ever learned something new, whether it's how to send a message, how to make a Zalo call, or simply how to find that old song on YouTube, leave a number 7 so I know you're still taking steps forward. And if you haven't started yet, maybe today is the day. Helen woke up every day at 5:30, not because anyone called her, not because an alarm rang, but because she wanted to. Her small room was bathed in soft golden light each morning. On the table by the window, it had a worn fabric-bound notebook, a blue ink pen, and a cup of ginger tea she brewed herself. She didn't reach for her phone. She didn't turn on the TV. Instead, she sat down, opened a blank page, and began writing 3 things she was grateful for. 1, I woke up today, which means I'm still alive. 2, I heard birds outside the balcony, which means I can still hear. 3, my back hurts, which means my nerves still work. She wrote in a calm, unembellished voice, not overly optimistic, not sugar-coated, but every word carried a quiet grace, a spirit of acceptance, not complaining toward life as it was. Helen hadn't always been this way. In her younger years, she had been sharp-tongued, strict, and judgmental. She hated slowness, got annoyed at noisy children, and snapped when people did things differently. After her husband passed and her children got busy with their own lives, she began living alone and felt as though everything was working against her. Chronic back pain, a dripping faucet no one fixed, a wall stained and left unpainted. One evening, after a fit of frustration over a broken TV remote, she broke down in tears. Not because of the remote, but because she saw herself becoming the very kind of person she had once feared, an irritable, lonely old woman. That night, she decided to change, not in any dramatic way. She simply bought a new notebook and began to write down the little things she still had. If I only look at what makes me unhappy, then life will be nothing but a string of complaints. But if I begin to notice what's still good, maybe, just maybe, I'll feel lighter. At first, it was hard to find anything worth gratitude, but slowly she began to notice things she once ignored. The chair that no longer creaked after she oiled it, the stray cat outside her door that now recognized her, and the paperboy who waved to her every morning. Once, her son Ethan came to visit. He noticed the notebook and read a few pages. Written inside were the simplest things. Grateful I can still walk to the garden without a cane. Grateful I can still laugh when I remember the old days. Grateful the kitchen sink didn't clog today. Ethan didn't say much, but as he hugged her goodbye, he whispered, "You've taught me how to live when life no longer looks the same." Helen didn't become a writer, didn't go viral on social media, didn't post pictures with inspirational quotes, but she changed herself by opening her heart to the world. No demands, no blame, no comparisons. A wide open heart is not the innocence of someone who knows nothing. It is the quiet strength of someone who has seen a lot, understands life, and still chooses to be gentle with it. As we age, many grow bitter, fearful, and closed off. But there are those like Helen, who let go, who soften, who lighten. Not because they don't feel sorrow, but because they choose to notice the light more than the dark. If life feels more irritating lately, If you find yourself quick to anger, to complain, or to judge, try pausing. Take a blank sheet of paper. Write down 3 things you're grateful for this morning. Maybe it's a deep breath, a tree still green outside your window, or an old memory that hasn't faded. And if you're still listening to me now, if you've ever tried to live a little lighter, with less blame and more grace, leave a number 8 so I know you're choosing a more beautiful path, the path of an open heart, a slower life, in a spirit of gratitude. Old age is not an end, it is a different journey, quieter, deeper, and if we know how, even more beautiful than any stage that came before. Throughout this video, we've walked through 8 stories, 8 lives, 8 choices, 8 different ways of living. But they all share one thing. They didn't let age define them. They didn't let circumstances blur their self-worth. And most importantly, they are still living, in the truest sense of the word. Helen learned how to care for herself when no one else was around. Joseph held on to his dignity after a costly lesson from a deceptive product. Frank preserved his intellect through newspaper clippings and handwritten notes. Ruth reconnected with her daughter, not through advice, but by listening. George nurtured a passion through his drawings, holding on to the image of a wife, slowly forgetting him. Elizabeth cycled every morning, not out of duty, but because her love remained undiminished. Walter, at 80, learned to video call just to see his grandchildren's faces more clearly. And Helen appeared once more, this time as someone who had learned to let go, to be grateful, and to live more gently. They weren't perfect, but they were real. You don't have to do it all, but you can start with something small. Try writing one thing you're grateful for tomorrow morning. Call a son or daughter you haven't spoken to in a while. Cook yourself a simple meal. Ride a bike down the street. Open a notebook and write down a beautiful memory. Learn how to press one button on your phone that still confuses you. Every small act is a quiet affirmation to yourself. I am still alive. I still have value. I am still me. If these stories touched you in some way, please leave a comment. Tell me how old you are and what you're taking with you from this video. And if you believe this video might help a friend, a parent, someone lonely, please share it, because sometimes just one story is enough to warm someone's heart. Thank you for staying until the end. We'll meet again in other stories, softer, deeper, and as familiar as the way people talk over 2 cups of hot tea. See you soon.